Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mattis, in last year's NDAA, Congress required the Department to evaluate whether existing cruise missile systems could be converted into ground-launched version as part of our response to Russia's violation to the INF Treaty. The Department's response, which was a letter from Undersecretary Lord, was sent to the committee 2 weeks ago. And it states that DOD is in the early stages of identifying the system requirements and is therefore unable to conduct an assessment at this time. I know the department is moving forward on a broader effort beyond just a ground-launched cruise missile, but I am concerned about the urgency of our response because, as we both know, we can spend the next 3 years defining requirements and analyzing alternatives and not conduct any actual research and development. So I would just ask, what is your expected timeline for moving forward on this, and have you set any kind of internal goals to ensure that we don't spend years in this preliminary stage?
Right. It's a very applicable question. What we are doing right now, as you know, we once had a sea-launched cruise missile, nuclear cruise missile. We took those off after the Berlin Wall and the years afterwards off the Navy ships. So by going back to a weapon that we had before, there's a fair amount of already sunk technology costs that we won't have to redo, won't have to come back up and ask for again. I need to get back to you on the specific timeline, but remember what we're trying to do here, Senator, is to put our diplomats in the strongest position to force the Russians back into compliance. I've been personally engaged with a Russian, high-ranking Russian on this issue, and I would just tell you that the NATO allies are also increasingly taking this message to Moscow. But we are going forward with this, and I'll have to get back to you with a timeline. It's a very good question. I don't have the answer, but I'll get it.
I really appreciate your sense of urgency because, as we all know, the Russians were in violation 4 years ago on that treaty, and I agree with you, and obviously Congress agrees with you as well, that a response is necessary. The administration has also stepped forward on that. Mm-hmm. So thank you. Also, Russia continues to expand the scope of its malign activities in Syria. It's building up installations, it's aiding the regime, it's expanding its footprint in the country. And recent reports have also suggested that Russian forces are jamming U.S. unmanned aerial vehicles. They're conducting electronic warfare operations against the EC-130 aircraft. Are the Russian forces actively harassing American forces in Syria? And what do you believe is an appropriate response if you agree that they are?
I cannot target the responsibility to the Russians right now. As you know, it's a crowded battlefield, and it's also got Iranians there, and of course the regime forces as well. But you notice as we go forward with we've so far sanctioned 189 individuals in Russia, and we're looking at those who have, we've also, as you know, thrown 6 of their diplomats out, and economic sanctions are going to be obviously looked at for future violations as well. So we have an asymmetric way, an indirect way of going back after them and making them pay. Right now in Syria, we have an odd and somewhat open and never interrupted deconfliction communication line that has worked pretty well to make certain we don't run afoul of one another's forces or one another's operations. They are not coordinated, they're deconflicted in either time or space, mostly in space. The river, for example, the Euphrates, divides our activities in some cases.
Did you use that deconflicted line in communication with the Russians when it was reported in February that there were large numbers of Russian irregular forces that had attacked U.S. forces?
It was used, Senator. The Russian High Command in Syria assured us it was not their people. and my direction to the chairman was for the force then was to be annihilated. And
Thank
it
you,
was.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator